Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again. And today I'm going to be showing you pretty much everything there is to know about this Elementalist character. Some of the boss fights, Guardians, Atziri, Shaper, some tier 15 bosses, all that good stuff as I usually do, but I'm actually going to start out with quite a lot of discussion about the Elementalist and my current setup because of quite a lot of things have changed in the past couple of days, or I've updated a few gem links and how I'm scaling the character and all that. So there's quite a lot of discussion to go through. Feel free to take a pen, paper, sit down, learn some shit. Gonna try and take you to school. If you happen to be a master of the universe and you know everything there is to know about this game, then go ahead and skip ahead to the part where I'm gonna poon some noobs, bosses, do some fat ignites, and all of that. Right, so this character is now level 92. It is an Elementalist witch. I'll start off by talking about Fireball itself and shotgunning. So as you can see here, Fireball currently with GMP shoots 5 projectiles, and it used to shotgun. Now what shotgunning means is if you stand close enough to a target and you fire all 5 projectiles and all 5 hit, then they all do damage, and it's technically a shotgun. Now that does not happen anymore. What actually happens is AoE overlap still exists. Now it's kind of hard to see the AoE potential of Fireball without the microtransaction. So it's a little bit pay to win in that sense. You put the microtransaction on and you can see the big ass explosions from each individual Fireball. So there is still AoE overlap, which is kind of like shotgunning. If a single target gets hit by all 5 of those AoEs, then all 5 of them do damage. If it's spread out enough that they don't, then maybe only one of them would do damage. So ideally you will be trying to hit all 5 onto a target, or if you're using a Dying Sun, all 7 onto a target. Which is why you try and get as much area as possible without sacrificing too much. So we have increased area here, and 1 rolling flame jewel. So you stack some area so that you can AoE overlap onto most targets while mapping, I suppose, and sometimes against boss fights, but not always. So that's why we now have increased area, and that's how AoE overlap works. It's kind of like a shotgun, but it's not. Next up is the double dipping and the way burn damage works, or ignite damage works in this game. So the reason you're an Elementalist is to have lots of good ignites from Conflux, as well as, and Prolif mostly really, but you also get a lot of shocks and some guaranteed ignites, and ignite, shock, and chill every 2 seconds, every 14 seconds. For 2 seconds every 14 seconds, and there's quite a few other perks as well. So we're scaling ignite, we're scaling shock in that sense too. Now the way burn works is fire damage increases your initial hit as well as increasing burning damage. So something like fire damage and elemental damage, those 2 mods will double dip your damage, and that means they're scaling the initial hit and then the after thought, which is burn. Unlike spell damage, for example, which would just scale your initial hit and it won't increase the damage of your burn at all. So you're trying to go for as much fire damage as possible and elemental damage in your build for something like this to scale as much burn and initial hit as possible. Which is why on your jewels you will, for example, want fire damage, general damage, because things like spell damage and the crit multi with fire skills here only scale the initial hit, which is still good, but not quite as good. Which is why we're running a Doriani's Catalyst at the moment. I initially did not want to run this item because I had a caster dagger and it gave me 180 spell crit, and I didn't think I could get away without using my dagger, so I didn't. I have been using a Doriani's Catalyst for the past couple of levels, and it gives like 120% LE damage, 130 if you got a really good roll, which is huge amounts of fire damage and burn scaling. It's got a little bit of crit, and it's also got some attack speed and cast speed, which is kind of nice. Now with this whole setup, I am running something like 33 crit unbuffed, 49 crit with full power charges, which is always, and then Diamond Flask makes it a lot more consistent as well. So Doriani's Catalyst is actually pretty good and a very cheap option for this setup. Now double dipping also is included in things like slow projectiles. So you attack with your slow projectiles, it increases your 30% your initial projectile by 30%, as well as the burn by 30%. So gems like this are very important, and it's also why using something like GMP while clearing maps is so bad for your burn, because it reduces your initial hits of Fireball by 26% and also reduces the burn by 26%. So GMP compared to slow proj, when you sub it in for single target, is something like half your damage on burn, if not more. So the current setup I'm going with right now, after a lot of trial and tests and all that, is Fireball, Controlled Destruction, Fire Pen. Those are probably your three staples. Then it depends on where you're taking the character. I managed to get a level 4 Empower because I was leveling at 2 Empowers for like a couple of weeks, and one of them turned into level 4. That's probably your next best bet. But then we have Increased Area and GMP. That's my clearing skills there. If you've only got a 5 link, you're probably going to want to run no increased area, or maybe no empower actually, I'd say. But the reason increased area is there is so we can sub in Conk Effect later, because Fireball works in kind of a weird way. You don't get any increased damage from Conk Effect on your tooltip. And the only way you get increased damage from your Conk Effect is on the explosions. So whenever your Fireball goes ahead and explodes, you get damage scaling from Conk Effect. It doesn't show up in your tooltip, but it does do 58% more damage. So I was running Pierce initially, which is fine because some of my projectiles are piercing, some of my projectiles are exploding, but if you want to use Increased Area and Conk Effect to sub in one over the other during a single target, you can't use Pierce, because if a projectile pierces and it doesn't explode, it doesn't get scaled via Conk Effect. So that's why Conk Effect is important here. That's why no Pierce is important at this stage. So my main clearing setup is like that, and you see in the later videos how goddamn effective it is, and it's a complete face roll. We then go single target by swapping in Slow Proj and Conk Effect, and with full buffs, both my golems, we're running 102,000 DPS, no power charges, and then on top of that, a huge multiplier by Conk Effect. You'll see the absolute insane burn potential from that a bit later. Next up, I feel the need to talk about the other option in the build, and that is Flameblast. So I've been trying Flameblast quite a bit as well as Fireball. Initially this is a Fireball build, and it still is for me. Fireball is a bit more fun, and it's what I wanted to do initially. But if you don't have a Dying Sun, Fireball gets a little less interesting, and if you don't have a 6 link, then it's also kinda worse. But Flameblast is actually quite insane. So in this setup, Flameblast is only on a 5 link, it's Empower, Control Destruction, Conk, and Fire Pen. And this actually has much better burn than the Fireball does, at least when you get to max stacks. It hurts my mana a lot, and that's why I have a mana flask, and it still does hurt quite a lot, and my crit chance is somewhat worse with it. But the burns, as you see later on, are much more significant with Flameblast, so if you don't have quite this budget and you still want to play a burn Elementalist, then Flameblast is fine. Fireball is still fine as well, but you won't have quite as much effectiveness as I do with a Dying Sun. So Flameblast is definitely an option, and actually stronger for the burn effectiveness overall. It's just a little less fun to play because Fireball is kind of a novelty. Also, I've recently started wearing a Valyrium ring just to prevent stuns while mapping for the most part. Bosses like Shaper do not need really any stun resist because you're not trying to get hit by anything anyway, and at that point I have absolutely no stun resistance and I'm wearing all of my usual shit. But Valyrium does lend itself to some quite smooth mapping, so some level of stun resist, whether it's Valyrium, an Eye of Chayula, or 80% stun resistance on your boot enchant, is definitely going to be needed at some point. I currently have damage leeched and mana leeched when I've killed recently, which is very, very good for my general sustain and my mana sustain. I don't really need it for mana sustain. My mana flask keeps me up plenty, and you're probably going to need to run a mana flask, so bear in mind with that, but it's a very nice enchant to have. So it's kind of a loss running a Valyrium because, as I was mentioning, fire damage and elemental damage is so strong, and with an Opal ring you can roll it with an essence, anger essence I believe, for fire damage, and one ring can give you 50% fire damage from the ele and the fire damage roll, and that's pretty insane if you get 2 rings with it. So try and go for that. you want to scale as much elemental damage as possible. Besides that, there aren't actually too many other changes to mention. I did Chaos, a really insane shield, for some good crit chance, and Energy Shield, and I 6-linked an Infernal Mantle, which is why we now have this setup. Valyrium has made capping resist just a little harder, but it's not terribly hard for me anyway. Just early weakness maps are a bit more dangerous, and I can always take that off anyway. I don't have any troubles living without stun resist most of the time. It's just if I want to play a lot faster and ballsier, I really do need stun resist, and for certain fights out there, it's very much useful. Passive tree hasn't really changed too much, I don't think. I unfortunately had to take these two because I already had my gear set in stone, and I wasn't going to upgrade anymore. To wear a Duranis Catalyst and some of these gems, I needed a bit more strength and dexterity. I hope you fix your gear to not need these things in the future. I tried to go for more jewel sockets because they're really good for damage, fire damage, crit multi, all that good stuff. Some attack speed, cast speed. It's not a very good jewel though. Yeah, in general that's it. I did reallocate these witch nodes after I went to CI to get the elemental damage nodes on the shadow tree, because they double dip, as I already mentioned. Ideally, I did want to get Mastermind of Discord, but I just don't feel like I can afford to, because you're going for Prolif and you pretty much need reduced reflect damage taken, so I did have to do that. And then golems are amazing, 2 of them. They do quite a lot of tanking with the minion life support. There's not much else to mention anymore. Orb of Storms is what triggers your elemental equilibrium, so whenever you're fighting pretty much anything, you will always have an Orb of Storms down, and that gives you a whole lot of extra damage towards your burn, as well as your initial hit. So make sure you're using your Orb of Storms, and make sure you have elemental equilibrium. It is absolutely essential, I would say. I also got rid of a Vile Fireball, I should mention. I haven't really properly set up anything else in my helm, just running a Flame Dash and a Vile Discipline now, because that helps me a lot more during bosses and certain other fights. You should probably have an increased duration there. You should probably also run a Vile Clarity, something like that. I'm not too sure. And as well as that, casting damage taken, Mortal Coil, pretty good for survivability, and Shield Charge, Fortify, faster attacks, gets you going for everything else. And now I have 10 minutes worth of clips to show you, so strap in and enjoy the ride. This is a shaped arena, tier 13, and it's kind of just an example of how smooth the mapping is in this current form, with GMP, increased area, really strong burn damage, strong overlap, and what Prolif really brings to the table. Because a lot of people have asked why not Inquisitor, and Inquisitor may end up doing more damage, but it'll be a far less comfortable character to play with no Prolif, no Reflect, protection, all that junk. Here we're at Chimera. Chimera is actually a pretty smooth fight for this character. This map role has monster damage and vulnerability, so he hits pretty hard, but I burn him down rather quickly, so it's not much of an issue. And as you can see here, it's one of the best builds I've had for dealing with ads. I kill the ads almost immediately, and the Prolif takes care of most of them. You just have to kind of be careful not to get hit by too many of them, or the actual boss ads themselves. But Chimera, all you got to do is land a couple of good ignites, and he will be dying. And then you're onto the ad phases, which you probably want to swap a gem or two out for. Typically, just an increased area instead of a conk effect will do it. But I am fairly well geared, so I can tackle harder and harder chimeras. I don't really recommend doing that. Rather just do easier ones. Gorge can kill the goats, can kill the end goat extremely quickly. This guy, I rarely jump into full-blown single target mode for these sorts of boss fights in tier 12 to 15 map, but when I do, you can see how ridiculously overkill it is. This is our first sort of Shaper clip. My first Shaper kill I think was deathless, maybe I had 1 death, but these days I am running Shapers rather deathless. I've done maybe 5 or 6 of them without dying on the Fireball version. I won't show too much of it, just a couple of clips here or there to show off the ignite damage, because it's a fairly straightforward fight. You kill him rather quickly. It's not very hard because you kill him so quickly, so you don't have to worry too much about phases. The only kind of nuisance is the ad phase, because it does get a bit annoying hitting the ads when they're running around, so a dying sun goes a long way to letting that happen. You'd probably want to sub in an increased area gem otherwise, or maybe even GMP. At that point, mana becomes a bit more of an issue, but ads so far haven't been a problem for me, they are just somewhat annoying. Shaper himself, all you gotta do is get a couple of good ignites, and he's gonna go down, and Flameblast does it a bit better, but Flameblast tackles the ads a bit worse. So Fireball for Shaper has probably been my smoothest Shaper kills so far this league. I think my third or fourth character that actually can down him, and it's been very easy at this level of gear anyway. Whether or not it's doable is going to be largely up to your skill, probably, because you can do it on a 5-link, you can do it without a level 4 in power quite comfortably, can probably even do it without the Dying Sun. Very budget. The thing is, you will just have to run around longer, for a bit longer. One nifty thing you can see here is the golems, since they're immune to elemental damage, apparently don't take any damage from those bullet hell phases. So that indicates that those balls are completely elemental, and the golems don't die to that. That's something I didn't know, so maybe you learnt it too. Phoenix, kind of a tough fight for this character. I'm fairly well geared at this point, so all I really have to do is get a few good phases where I can sit still and attack him, but he is ignite immune, so you can't ignite him. Just have to drop your Orbis Storms, make sure he's trying to get Ellie equilibriumed almost all the time. Use your flasks when you can to get some big deeps on him. So it's not a very hard fight for me when I have my level of DPS, especially with the Dying Sun, because the overlaps on your 3 projectiles do quite a bit more damage since there's no more burn and you do rely a bit more on the overlaps, but it's still quite an annoying fight, and of course Ignite Immune is the bane of our existence on this character. So you could swap into double consumings, and since you're already using Infernal Mantle, you have a lot of chaos damage that way. I tried it once or twice, and it didn't feel significantly better. I hardly noticed poison doing anything, so yeah, don't know if that's really worth it, because if you're going to use 2 consumings, you're going to have to recolor your chest, since you'll be running Fire Pen still, and that's a complete waste. So you'd technically be attacking him on a 5-link. You've got to recolor to have a Void Manipulation instead, so that you're actually doing something with your 6th link, and scaling your poison and your chaos, double dipping that way. But in general, it's not a very enjoyable fight. This was a minus max map, by the way, 15 minus max, and I died to that tornado because I was reading chat at the time, and I didn't even know what the fuck killed me, to be quite honest. Manageable fight, not very enjoyable, kind of wanted to skip through it a bit, and that's probably about all we'll see of this guy. This is back to the Shaper with a 5-link Flameblast setup at the moment. So Flameblast, like I mentioned, doesn't really benefit from Dying Sun too much, so this is a much more budget version, but it is a bit more tricky to play because mana becomes kind of an issue, so you probably want to run an Elrion Ring, at least one, or an Amulet, or a better mana flask. And then the ad phase is a bit trickier, as you can see, because the corpses explode completely, so they don't have any prolif. You probably want to sub in increased area instead of conk effect and do some more large bursts there, or just dab very lightly with the conk effect. But when you get some good ignites on Shaper, on this 5-link, it's doing more damage than the 6-link Fireball ignites were, which is pretty insane, considering Fireball is also level 21 and Flameblast is level 20. Here's a good example of some of the ignites you can get. Now, I don't have very good crit with the Flameblast though. It's only something like 38, maybe 40 with power charges, which becomes a bit inconsistent, and you definitely need some stun immunity or stun prevention with Valerium, because you'll get stunned a lot and broken out of your casts. Now we're up to Uber Atziri. This is probably the most trivial I've ever had the trash be for a character. The Elementalist just completely destroys the Uber Atziri trash here. I didn't put up any sort of a fight at all, so ideally if I was going to do like lots of these runs, I'd probably log on to this character and do trash with the Elementalist, and then do boss kills with the Dream Feather, because that could ensure deathlessness on both characters quite comfortably. But at this stage, this place is terrible for Elementalist, Fireball, Ignite, Prolif, because just about every single fight has some aspect of Ignite immunity. if you don't do it too well, which I don't right now. We're up against the Vals. If you kill one of the Vals, the other one enrages. When the other one is enraged, he becomes Ignite immune and Shock immune and everything. So it becomes a lot harder for me to kill. So I fucked that up completely by killing one of them way too quick, and I paid the ultimate price. It just means I then have to fight him for, I don't know, 20-30 seconds by killing him on pure fireball damage with no ignite, which is rather hard to do. I'm lucky I have a Dying Sun and am fairly well geared, but if you fuck it up with a 5-link and no Dying Sun, it may be the end of your run. So Ignite Immune is still an absolute bitch in this game for characters like this, which is why Atziri is not a great zone for this character. The trio, once again, the first two will be ignitable. The third one cannot be ignited because he's the last one alive and he becomes status immune. So the only way to get around that is you can burn him before the second one dies. If you get an ignite on the guy, on both of them, when one of them dies, the last one will still have his ignite, but it'll be status immune, so you can't reignite him. So you might get a good chunk of damage in that way. Atziri, of course, ignite immune, so I'm hitting her pretty hard still, but my defenses aren't great, so I largely have to run around in circles and just pray that the spears don't hit me, which hasn't been too much of a problem, but I do get caught out, as you'll see in a second. Besides that, the split phase, very quite easy. All you do is target the Spearad, because the Spearad is the only one that can be both shocked and ignited, which is why you kill that one. And it dies pretty much immediately to a single hit. If you got to run around for a second, you might have to do that, because the burn will, you might not crit, or you might not hit with all your projectiles, but the burn is more than enough to take care of her almost immediately. There's not too much else to mention about Atziri here. It's just not a great fight in general for Elementalist or for Ignite-based characters. So basically, if you want to play this character, don't do it for Atziri purposes. This character is amazing for farming maps, pretty good for most Guardians, and pretty damn good for Shaper. Atziri is not great. You can definitely do it and get it on farm status, but it's going to take some skill and some gear, and it's not going to be very easy regardless of that. Lastly, just a quick clip of Hydra. Hydra is about as hard as you make it. Depends on the map mods you put onto it. If it's no real map mods, she's pretty easy. She dies rather quick. She gets burnt. It's not too bad. That is everything you need to know about the Elementalist Fireballer. I hope that wasn't too long. I know it was. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.